there are a slew of players on this roster who are set to become third-year players soon enough, who we expect big things out of. And I think it's okay to put those expectations on some of those players based on what they've done in their first 2 seasons. We hear Buffalo's general manager, Brandon Beane, talk about quite frequently year 3 being the breakout year for a lot of players across different positions, because they've had 2 years in the system to truly get an offense or defense down, feel comfortable with where they're at with the coaches that they have over them, and finally time to really come into your own as an NFL player. Let's start with tight end Dalton Kincaid, who is going to be a third-year player. He finished his sophomore season starting in 9 games, 44 catches, 448 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Kincaid is another player that missed time due to injury. He was on the inactive list a few games this season, and after the season ended, Beane and Sean McDermott both said Dalton Kincaid needs to get stronger this offseason so he doesn't suffer those injuries and can last throughout an entire year.
Yeah, it's exactly what I spoke to in the last segment, that maybe there are times with specific players it takes even 3 years to become NFL strong. And when you're a tight end, you're doing so many different things. You're not just catching passes. You need to be able to block. And like you said, it's a really, really long season, especially when you're the Bills going deep into the playoffs. Yeah. And it's not surprising that someone that was a receiving specialist tight end that wasn't really a great, or wasn't drafted for his blocking, that to have the GM and the coach say, yeah, you got to get stronger entering year 3. It's a huge season, like you mentioned, for a lot of players, especially when you were a first-round pick.
Kincaid had that knee injury.
PCL,
and,
right?
Yeah, you heard players after the season. It was Dawson Knox who really stuck up for Kincaid and said, you know, he was dealing with multiple things that you guys don't know about, kind of described the PCL and said, and then he had a bunch of fluid in his knee as well and was playing on that. So Knox described it as something that was a lot harder than, you know, viewers and fans, you know, thought of Kincaid with just this one injury. It was multiple injuries that he was dealing with that he decided to play through. Another player who has been a big part of Buffalo's defense, and I'm really excited to see what he does in his 3rd year with the Bills, it's Dorian Williams, Buffalo's linebacker. He was drafted in the 3rd round in the 2023 draft, and unfortunately, Matt Milano tears his bicep during training camp when it's looking like Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano are going to be back together. Dorian Williams steps into a starting role for much of last season, starts in 11 games, leads the team with 114 tackles, has 5 TFLs, 2 quarterback hits. What do you want to see out of Williams in year 3?
Just the continued development that we saw it from year 1. We saw some splashes. Year 2, in a full-time role, essentially, looked like an NFL starter, a higher-level starter at times. So I'm going to try to infuse as much or as many numbers into this as possible.
Yeah.
Dorian Williams had 42 stops. And what a stop is by Pro Football Focus, it is a tackle that constitutes a loss for the offense based on down and distance. So not every 4-yard gain is the same. If it's on 3rd and 3, they get the first down. If it's on 1st and 10, that's pretty good for the defense. 42 stops. That was the 23rd most among all linebackers, and Williams played the 50th most snaps. So he was, in terms of bang for your buck and efficiency, in terms of those Matt Milano-esque splash plays near the line of scrimmage, Dorian Williams was really, really good. And in coverage, Dorian Williams only allowed 7.9 yards per catch in his coverage area, which was the 13th lowest among all linebackers in the NFL. So not a lot over his head, not a lot of running backs or tight ends catching the football, creating after the catch, and against the run, he was a missile to the football. That I think Terrell Bernard is really like the brain of the Bills defense, where he knows where everyone needs to be, the coverage, the play description or design for the offense. Dorian Williams is see ball, get ball. And we talked about that, and I love talking about Williams. He was a huge draft crush of mine. I was happy when the Bills picked him. Sean McDermott spoke to that when Dorian Williams was a rookie and when he had to take over for Matt Milano, that he is a run and chase linebacker. The athleticism is through the roof. He ran sub 4.5 at the combine. Super speed. I think it's, again, like we talked about it with the safeties, a really good complementary group with Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard.
Williams just missed 9 tackles last season, and you speak about see ball, get ball for Williams. He was a player that you draft for his traits. I remember Buffalo's GM, Brandon Beane, speaking about the defense that Williams played in at Tulane, it being a very different defense, vanilla defense, where you don't have to do too much in it. And the jump that Williams had to make in Buffalo's defense is not an easy one. Williams said during his rookie season, it was hard to figure out what we were doing.
Yeah.
Year 2, I feel much more comfortable in the system. And you see that, him missing just 9 tackles and being a full-time starter.
Yeah, he was a lot more sure of a tackler, and I think that's, again, the specific players that can be impacted by the fact that the Bills are retaining both coordinators, that he will be going into essentially year 3 with the same coordinator, same defensive scheme in Buffalo. So I think the sky's the limit for him. I'm a big traits guy, like I've been saying, and if we're talking about Dorian Williams as one of the best year 3 or just young linebackers in all of football next season, I will not be surprised.
All right, next up for players who could make a big impact on this roster in year 3, it's one of Buffalo's offensive linemen, O'Cyrus Torrence, who I think has had an incredible 2 years as an NFL player and has been a glue guy on the offensive line, somebody who is bigger in his position but has some light feet. What do you project for Torrance's 3rd season?
Well, based on his first 2 years, and really I'll go back 3 or 4 years, to go from Louisiana to Florida and not really miss a beat and look as good in the SEC as he did in the Sun Belt, that was one thing. Then he goes 2nd-round pick to the NFL, plays over 1,000 snaps, and it felt like 90% of the Bills games, you didn't even know he was on the field. There was not a lot of penalties. There were not a lot of times where he was a liability blocking for the run, allowing pressures of Josh Allen. And then in year 2, he was even better, and it goes back to what we talked about with Kincaid and with other players, being NFL strong. I mean, this is a big, strapping dude, but to add even more power and more width and more strength to his lower half, I am fully expecting O'Cyrus Torrence to be on that Pro Bowl caliber type player radar next season. That's not to say he's never had a bad rep. When you're playing 1,100 snaps, you're going to have some of those. But to limit those because of how well he can deal with pass rushers with his length and his power will be paramount for year 3 for him. And I think everything that he's done over the last 4 years shows that his arrow is still pointing up.
Torrence is 6'5", 330 pounds. I did a podcast episode with him at the end of the season, and reflecting on his rookie season, Torrence said, I hit that rookie wall. I felt it. I think that's something that I experienced in my first season that was a negative. Year 2, I know what to expect. I know what's demanded of me throughout a long NFL season into the playoffs. And one thing that he was open and honest about was when he felt like he was taking a step back in his play, what he did to help motivate himself was look at old tape, whether it be a good game, whether it be a previous season of what he did well, and kind of try to harness that and bring it into the next game so he didn't continue that slump. I thought that was a cool nugget from how Torrence motivates himself throughout the season.
And having Aaron Kromer there again, who's this veteran offensive line coach. You know, a lot of people say the best offensive line coach in the NFL for now going on a 3rd season will be huge. I teased that I was going to bring up a lot of numbers. I did not mention Dalton Kincaid. If we can jump back to him for a second. I want to talk about him because we mentioned Keon Coleman and that the disparity between Coleman pre-injury and post-injury. Dalton Kincaid is like the exact same case for 2024. Before his injury, he got injured against the Colts in Week 10. He was averaging about 3.5 catches, 36 yards per game, and vitally, the advanced statistic here to look at, 20.5% missed tackle forced rate. And when you watched him at Utah, he was catching those zone sits and those underneath routes, making 2 or 3 guys miss, creating a big play. So 20.5% missed tackle forced rate pre-injury. Post-injury, he was only averaging 2.6 catches per game and 27 yards, which is not way off, but it's certainly a dip in both of those, classic statistical categories. The missed tackle force rate went down to 6.2%, down from 20.5%. So Kincaid didn't have that ability, like you're mentioning, fluid in his knee, a torn PCL, playing through it, to make that linebacker miss, to then turn that 6-yard pass into a 12-yard gain. And what we saw a lot from him, making something out of essentially nothing or a high percentage throw, that ability just wasn't there. So if presumably healthy in 2025, the Bills get pre-injury Dalton Kincaid from 2024 and he maybe builds a little bit, is a little stronger, and can stay healthy in the everybody eats offense, I think they will certainly like the production that they get from Dalton Kincaid.
This dude has a half a year to put on muscle and strength ahead of the 2025 season. You think if your head coach and your GM tasked you with doing so, coming off of a season where you had numbers where maybe you thought you were going to take a step forward and you didn't, I look at Kincaid as being an extra motivated player who wants to prove I can get stronger, I can last in the NFL as a pass-catching tight end, and I can add to the blocking game as well. He's somebody who's going to want to prove I deserve another contract here in Buffalo.
And we're speaking about mentors with Aaron Cromer and a lot of other players on the roster giving that redshirt type season to these young players. I mean, obviously look at Dawson Knox, who came in as a highly athletic but pretty raw tight end. Kincaid was more of a polished product than Dawson Knox. And Knox has really morphed into a complete tight end and he's gotten bigger and stronger. And if you ask any Bills coach, McDermott spoke to it, Brandon Beane spoke to it after the year, a great part of the run game, an important part of the run game. It wasn't just Alec Anderson as that sixth offensive lineman. It was being able to attach Dawson Knox to the line and move defensive ends and move linebackers at the second level. So when it comes to learning how to build your body and the technique that comes with becoming a quality run blocking tight end along with all the athleticism that you have, Dalton Kincaid has the perfect mentor and his really close friend, Dawson Knox.
And Dawson Knox this season proved to be a go-to guy at the end of the season. Knox is a tight end who the first couple years of his career had some of those big-time drops where it was like, man, if you could catch the ball in this moment, it would be huge for what it could do to a game or to a drive. Knox capitalized off of doing that this season at the end of the year, and Josh Allen pointed Knox out as a player who was not recognized by many on the outside, but who was super meaningful to Buffalo's roster in 2024, both in the locker room and on the field. So I think that just cements what this player means to Buffalo's roster, not just this past season, but going forward in his career here as well.
Yeah, he's a glue guy, and even if he's not catching 40, 50, 60 passes, maybe there is a lot of value that he can provide to help and mentor Dalton Kincaid.